so I want to cover something briefly. So, in Canada, there is a bill called C11. There is a fair bit of misinformation out there about it. But the two core points that vtubers should be concerned about is if they produce VODs that do not contain Canadian content, and if they collaborate with others. Because under the proposed rules, all user-generated content on YouTube would be subject to this, despite the politicians' assertions that only commercially produced content would. Because they see the potential for YouTube to weasel out of this by calling all content UGC. Therefore, if there are ads on your content, you are subject to this. Anyway, some of the content out there about C11 is a bit alarmist. But the reason for it is simply because there is a fear of being censored. The producer must be Canadian and is responsible for monitoring and making decisions pertaining to the program. The earns a minimum of 6 out of 10 points based on the key creative functions that are performed by Canadians. At least one of either the director or screenwriter positions, and at least one of the two lead performers must be Canadian. A minimum of 75 of program expenses and 75 of post-production expenses are paid for services provided by Canadians or Canadian companies. This is where VTubers would have a hard time, since agencies like Hololive and Nijisanji are outside of Canada. Even though they have hired Canadians to produce content, they do not count as Canadian programming. Likewise, most streamers on Twitch or YouTube who are Canadian would not qualify as Canadian programming if they were to collab with more than one non-Canadian. And then there is the other problem. The Cancan rules do not dictate that program must be made in French. But this 11 mentions French frequently enough that it may surprise the politicians to know that the most popular Twitch streamer is a Canadian from Quebec who speaks English. Even as some of the most popular content on YouTube is English Canadians, like Linus Tech Tips or Justin Bieber's channel. The politicians think they are going to be forcing Netflix to produce quality content, when instead it will be YouTubers and Twitch streamers being buried by the discovery algorithms because they aren't Canadian enough. And that all I really had prepared for this part of the stream. Ovia XQC is popular on Twitch, but his content is English. And that would so disappoint Quebec politician. Notice 11 was originally 10. The numbers restart every session. And TikTok has the most accurate argument against C11, because they frequently have to deal with music licensing. And if C11 passes as is, pretty much all meme-type content that isn't Canadian gets buried. And I'm sure XQC produces something that people find interesting, but that React content that a lot of Twitch and YouTube streamers do would not count as Canadian content unless they were reacting to Canadian content. Which is why things like memes would get buried. Hyuka Cookie Puss, like there are Canadian VTubers I watch, and some of them would probably not be that affected. Take Aheta, for example. Frequently does bring on a Haruka, Frogulok, and some Rainbow Pete, who are all Canadian. So if he wanted to make sure to always hit the Cancan quota, all he has to do is bring Frogulok on every time he has any non-Canadian guests.